In today's video, I wanted to talk about the Memphis Grizzlies because this is a team here who currently is sitting at 24-14 and the 4th seed in the Eastern Conference and has pretty much steadily been here for the vast majority of this season, and really no one across the NBA community is talking about just how good this team is and how they can actually get better as a team because of just how underrated their young core really is. So that's what I'm going to be analyzing in today's video, going through some of the core young players on this team, what they're looking like this season and going into their futures, and analyzing really why this team could be a potential championship contender, not only in the future but even potentially this season. So before we get started, it turns out that only 8% of you guys that have been watching my videos in the last month are subscribed. So if you're new to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button as well so we get on that road to 1,000 subscribers. With that being said, let's get into it. So who better to start with than Ja Morant, the franchise player of this team who has really broken out so far this season. If it wasn't for his knee injury and being out with some COVID protocols, he could honestly be in the MVP conversation right now. I mean, that's just how good he's been this season. Going into this year, I thought he was a little bit just overrated with people doing things like comparing him to Zion and whatnot, but he has definitely shown this year that he absolutely is in the conversation to be a top 20 player in the NBA right now. And so far this year, he's shown his ability to be one of the best crafty scorers at the rim, maybe even the best in the league at the point guard position of scoring at the rim effectively. He's shown how he has the ability to be an amazing playmaker, create space for his teammates, and be able to get a lot of wide open looks for his teammates on the floor. And he also has a great floater inside the paint, which is a shot that you definitely need in today's NBA to succeed as a point guard like Ja Morant. And he has also really improved on that three-point shot, which was definitely thought of one of his main weaknesses, but he has drastically improved on that this season as well. Not to mention that his perimeter defense has been pretty good as well. Overall, so far this season, Ja's averaging about 25 points per game on just over 49% from the field and over 40% from three, which is almost a 10% increase from his three-point percentage last season, which is absolutely insane. He's also putting up almost 6 rebounds and almost 7 assists on the year, and overall has a true shooting of almost 58% as well. So offensively, he's just been insane so far this season and has really led the Grizzlies to really getting themselves on the map here. Another player who's been a really big bright spot for the Grizzlies so far this year is Dillon Brooks, and as a Canadian, it's really nice to see Dillon Brooks kind of emerge this season on really both ends of the floor. Offensively, he still has stuff to work on. He's definitely below average for the league average efficiency when it comes to scoring, but he definitely does sometimes use his size to his advantage. He can be a good interior scorer at times, a decent three-point shooter at times, and most of his value comes on the defensive end of the floor. We saw especially last season in the playoffs just how good of a defender he was in not only the play-in games but also the first round against the Utah Jazz. He's probably the best on-ball defender on this team, and if he's not, it's probably Jaren Jackson Jr., but he's definitely at least the best perimeter defender on this team, and he's also a decent interior defender as he uses his size to his advantage a lot to do things like protect the rim and defend in the post. He's a switchable defender, and overall that's where most of his value comes, and he has been definitely a big factor for the Grizzlies' defensive success this year as well. Overall, so far this season, Brooks is putting up just over 19 points per game so far this year, only a 52.2% true shooting, which like I said is below the league average, but defensively he is putting up over a steal per game and has a defended field goal percentage of 46.5, which doesn't seem that low, but considering that most of the time he's guarding the other team's best player, this is pretty impressive as well. So especially defensively, Brooks has been really good for this team as well this year. Another player who's been a big surprise for this team so far this year is Desmond Bane. I really don't see how he's not in the most improved player conversation this year. He's almost doubled his points per game total and has really played the role of being the sharpshooter on this team very well. He does a great job of playing off ball, spacing the floor, and catch and shooting when he needs to, and he also does a pretty good job of creating his own shot. For example, when Ja Morant was not with this team, he was arguably the primary scorer on this team. It was probably Dillon Brooks, but in terms of who is actually the best and most efficient scorer, it was probably Desmond Bane. He can do a pretty good job of creating his own shot as well and running the offense at times. He's been a really underrated player throughout this whole season, and so far this year he's put up over 17 points per game and done this with a true shooting of 58.5, which for this season is pretty much 3% above the league average, which is definitely pretty good. And overall, when I talk about the 3-point shooting that he's done this year, he's shooting about 41.5% from 3 on 7 attempts per game. So you can see that especially when you watch him play as well, like I mentioned, he does a good job of spacing the floor, catching and shooting when he needs to, and sometimes also creating his own shot on the perimeter as well, and doing a great job of knocking them down efficiently. So another player here who's played his role really well offensively and really broken out so far this year for the Grizz. We also got to talk about Jaren Jackson Jr., who especially defensively has been really good for this team so far this year, and he's coming off pretty much missing all of last season. It's great to see him back and playing well. I mean, offensively, he's still a raw scorer, and he's not very efficient at all, shooting just over 40% from the field and just under 32% from 3, but the fact that he does have at least a little bit of a 3-point shot as a big man is good, because he can definitely run that pick and pop with some of the elite guards on this team, knock down that 3 at times, and he still has to be guarded out there on the perimeter, and I definitely see him improving his scoring and his efficiency throughout his career as well. But like I mentioned, his main value definitely comes defensively. He's a great post defender, a very good interior and pick and roll defender, and does exactly what he's asked to on the defensive end of the floor. Overall, so far this season, he is averaging 16 points per game. Like I mentioned, not good efficiency, only shooting 40.5% from the field, but he is putting up as well over 5 rebounds and does average 2 blocks per game as well, which is up there with some of the league's best. And overall, the stats don't even show just how good of a defender he is. I mean, you watch these games, and Jaren Jackson Jr. honestly has a case to be a top 30 defender in the game right now. He's just that good defensively, a great defensive anchor, and has provided a lot, especially on that end of the floor for the Grizzlies. The 4 players I've mentioned are definitely the 4 main players of the Grizzlies' young core, but they also have very good depth as well and some very good role players off of the bench. D'Anthony Melton has also pretty much broken out this season, does a good job of being the main leader of the second unit and a good perimeter defender. Brandon Clark has played his role fantastically this season as being a good roll man to the basket, good in the pick and roll, a good lob threat, and a pretty good versatile defender as well. A guy like Tyus Jones has done a good job this season of developing a little bit more, being a pretty good secondary playmaker for this team. A guy like Kyle Anderson, Mr. Slow-Mo, who is an oddly good at creating his own shot and being a decent scorer at times, and a pretty good and versatile defender as well. Steven Adams, who has been the traditional big man who gets on the glass a lot and still provides some pretty good rim protection on defense. And Xavier Tillman is another guy who I think will develop and probably become part of this big young core, and he's done a really good job of playing his role as a big man as well. So you can see how this team has really good depth too. I think that's really what helped them as well when Ja Morant was out, is how they constantly have guys that even if they get into trouble with COVID and their rotation starts to deplete a little bit, they have good depth and guys can start to fill in roles, and I think that's something that's really important in today's NBA as well. As an overall team, the Memphis Grizzlies have been so good this season. No one's really talking about it, and I know this sounds cliche, but they just have a lot of guys that just go out there and want it more than the other team, to be completely honest. Guys are so active, and that's what happens when you really have a young and energetic team like the Grizzlies. Is you're going to have guys that are so active and get on the glass a lot, get a lot of deflections and steals, and are active defensively. And what I've noticed from this team as well is they have a lot of good interior scorers that are willing to just meet guys at the rim and old-fashioned just go up and try to score at the rim as much as they can. They have decent shooting as well, but really guys like Ja Morant, Dillon Brooks, and Jaren Jackson Jr., these guys are the guys that really score at the rim a lot, try to get into the paint, and just do a really good job of doing that. And overall, when we look at some stats as the Grizzlies, just as an overall team, they have the 7th best offensive rating in the NBA and the 6th best assist to turnover ratio. Both of these stats just really show how good their offense has been so far this season. And then defensively, they do have the 15th best defensive rating in the league right now, but honestly, this stat should be a little bit higher as they faced a lot lot of tough offenses so far this season. They've actually had the 4th hardest schedule so far up to this point in the season of any teams in the NBA, so you're just going to see these stats get higher as the season goes on, most likely. And then they actually are number 1 in the league in both steals and rebounds per game. That talks to what I was saying about how active these players are and how much they want it. I mean, being number 1 in both rebounds and steals is really something that's going to benefit your team a lot. And then they're also 3rd in the league in blocks per game as well. So really those last 3 stats really speak to just how energetic this team can be and how they do the little things very well. Not only do they have a very obviously talented young core, but the little things that this team does is really going to help them to potentially lead them to a championship run in the next 2 to 3 years. So overall, as you can see, the Grizzlies definitely have a very underrated young core. Like I mentioned, they're sitting at the 4th seed right now in the Western Conference, and this team is going to be a team that you should be very scared of going into the future because they're just going to get better from here on out. So there you have it. That's all I've got for you guys today. Those are my thoughts on the Memphis Grizzlies and their underrated young core, in my opinion, and why I think they could definitely be a championship contender, potentially even this year and definitely into the future. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Be sure to comment down below your thoughts on the Memphis Grizzlies, and I'll see you all next video.